The views
And away
opinions
we go.
expressed on the following program are not necessarily those of the staff and management of KLAY or those who advertise their products or services on this station.
So a lot of people like to talk about our intro, and one of the things that's in it is a little bit of a European ringtone, actually a British ringtone.
I recognize it from a Pink Floyd song.
Exactly, and Pink Floyd is is really for me my first introduction to music, and what were these big square things that my dad had a huge collection of, all of which say Pink Floyd on them. And that was my introduction to music, we included that ringing noise. And I'm glad that somebody finally noticed it. So, happy Father's Day, everybody. This is Ask an Atheist, 253-584-1480. And with me today is Mike. How you doing?
Doing well.
And after a little bit of a break, hello, Becky.
Hi, Sam.
How are you?
I'm doing great this morning. Afternoon.
Morning, afternoon, whatever. Same difference to me. If you've been following the Facebook, I said, yeah, it's I'll be posting the video on Friday, and it's already Friday. Oh, never mind, it's Friday for me. So, did you guys know we're now down to 123 days again?
Until the end of the world?
Until the next end of the world.
Yeah. Is this going to be like when you go into a factory and it's been this many days since the last failed prophecy?
You know what? Maybe that's what we put back there. Is a sign saying this many days since the last failed prophecy.
I kind of always picture it as the McDonald's, 11 billion burgers eaten, except it's like 123 days until the next end of the world.
At least we won't need that many numbers for it. It seems like, well, we got this one, and then the next one coming up is 2012.
Yeah.
Well, unless anyone, tries to sneak in their next, their own personal end of the world before the 2012 prophecy.
Well, that's kind of how this one came about, is I think he wanted to send up the 2012 people. But either way, this is going to be his last one.
Yeah, I mean, he didn't get a Michael Bay movie or Roland Emmerich movie.
No, that's true.
How funny will that movie be after next year?
Probably about as funny as it is now, actually.
It'd be kind of like a big budget disaster film about Y2K.
Yay, spaceships! So, we do have another event coming up, a non-show Ask an Atheist event, and that is happening on July 1st to July 2nd from noon to noon. If you're familiar with the show, you probably know what this means.
Yeah, we occasionally put something on called Blog TV, which is kind of a live blogging chat room event where you get to watch us die in front of the camera for 24 hours.
Slowly and painfully.
The really fun thing about it is that it's not very structured, so you actually get to just hang out with us for 24 hours.
Yeah, it's basically we're in the monkey house and people throw questions rather than peanuts at us, and we.
I think I talked about Doctor Who and butterflies and cooking for a good hour or four.
Yeah, I had a brief discussion about multidimensional arrays in PHP and why it's a weird idea sometimes, and we talked about everything, and I happened to have a keg at the last one.
It was basically a party that you could watch over your computer.
Yeah, sort of like that old Playboy show where they'd have a party and just cameras following it around.
So if you'd like to hang out with the Ask an Atheist crew and watch us through your computer and interact with us, then tune in to Blog TV.
Yeah, just watch the website for details. And if you're in the area and want to hang out with us that night, let us know, and we'll hook everybody up.
And you can let us know by contacting us through our website, askanatheist.tv. Click on that nice big red button that says Ask a Question.
So it's been a big news week for atheism.
Has it?
A little bit.
For us, anyway.
Well, yeah, for us. I mean, we had the whole weird guy on TV a couple of weeks ago, and then this week there's the where is it in Seattle, that solstice parade?
The Fremont Solstice Festival and Parade.
Yeah, the Fremont Solstice Festival and Parade featuring
featuring Seattle Atheist's own flying spaghetti monster and his legion of pirates.
Yeah, the Spaghetti Monster was actually the work of Kyle Hepworth, who, I guess you could say he's sort of the craft version of MacGyver that Seattle Atheist has.
Indeed.
That he's really, really good. He's got a great blog where he just puts together just the funniest thing, but he built this giant flying spaghetti monster. This thing
enormous.
It's like at least 9 or 10 feet tall.
Yeah, yeah. If you go to the Wikipedia page for Flying Spaghetti Monster, his float is featured.
And you'll find at the Wikipedia entry for Flying Spaghetti Monster a little bit about what Flying Spaghetti Monster actually is. It was a satirical envisioning of a creator that a university student had put forth to the, I think, Kansas State School Board when they were wanting to inject intelligent design hypotheses.
Yeah, as a valid religious choice. And however, not all is well and good among the Pastafarians. And in the last week, we have a story, and this comes out of Bend, Oregon, from KTVZ. Praise the FSM. These are the words written, spray-painted, and tagged across not one, but 2 churches on the opposite sides of Bend Sunday night. When Pastor John Blubaugh of the Christian Life Center got the news Monday morning, his first thought was, not again.
Has this happened once before?
Really, what went through my mind was about 6 months ago we were tagged as well, said Blubaugh. It was the same kind of deal, different symbols, different sayings, but the exact same places. These are markings left 6 months ago from vandals who drew Harry Potter-type slogans across the church. Now they've got a whole different mess to deal with. The graffiti apparently refers to the Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster, a group of people who claim they do not believe in religion, but rather in what they call Pastafarianism.
Yeah, it's a stab at intelligent design. The whole idea is that intelligent design is just creationism, taking the specificity.
Sure.
I just murdered that word. You take the specifics out of it. So you just inject a obviously crazy kind of God in there.
So what happened is somebody spray painted these things, Flying Spaghetti Monster type stuff, across the churches on different sides of Bend, Oregon. This is bad.
Oh, this is definitely bad. And the sense that I get from it is clearly when they have things like praise the FSM and his noodly appendages, that sort of stuff. It's very clear that this is very likely to be somebody in our community.
Yeah.
And we wanted to announce that right off the bat, that yes, churches out there do horrible things. They do say horrible things. They say bigoted things. But this does not give you the right to damage their property. This does not give you the right to do to them what you would. You'd basically spit nails if they did to you.
Exactly. We wouldn't want anyone vandalizing any atheist-leaning billboards or any pluralistic messages. Certainly not private property. And it's just a very immature and adolescent thing to do, to be tagging, anti-religious messages on private property.
Yeah, and what really kind of got on my pecs about this one was everybody coming out of the woodwork saying, "Oh, this couldn't have been atheists. Atheists never do this." Da, 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 da.
Of course it could have been.
That's conspiracy theory thinking.
That sounds a lot like the no True Scotsman fallacy, and if you're not familiar with that,
Yeah.
It goes a little bit like, Sam, you want to act out the no True Scotsman fallacy with me?
Okay, go ahead.
No Scotsman would ever put sugar on his porridge.
Becky puts sugar on her porridge.
Well, she's not a true Scotsman. Oh! See, right there. What you do is you make a universal statement, and then somebody gives you an exception, and then you immediately start backpedaling
Right.
to call that person not a real X.
All that an atheist is someone that doesn't believe in God or gods. It doesn't say anything about their character or their inclinations towards tagging or mischief or anything like that.
Yeah, it was just a really bad scene. And the day that we were reading about it, I was actually writing about this on the blog when somebody just 10 feet away from me knocked out the passenger side window in Becky's car. Vandalism is bad, no matter who and what it happens to.
And the pastors go along to say that they really felt violated. They say it's a violation, you just feel violated, it's a disruption, you have to repaint, it costs extra for the paint. Absolutely. No one should be tagging and messing up your own private property.
One of there's 2 things I did notice here that I kind of have to take the church to task for. And one of them is more praise the FSM and hateful Bible messages were sprayed across the brand new expansion, some even on the bricks, which now will have to be cut out and replaced. Not true. I've had to clean. I used to clean up, spray painted stuff, and on bricks, you just sandblast it or use a cleaner or something like that. You don't necessarily have to completely replace the bricks. In this case, they were trying to trump up the amount of damage that was done to make it seem like a grievous error. And okay, no, don't do that. That's not cool. And then he goes on to say, yeah, it's a bummer what we have to go through and redo all for this brand new facility. Said Rod Kirk, the director of facilities for Westside Church. But the bottom line is that God is the one that's going to get revenge. We aren't.
Whoa, what the hell is that?
Yeah, I know.
Is that God's going to get you, Norman? Or it's like what the whole idea that don't worry, our invisible magic tribal deity is going to wreak revenge on you. Actually saying the word revenge?
Yeah, he said, revenge. Revenge is involved. And that, okay, so those two things, not a big fan of those two statements made by this church, but that doesn't take away from the fact that really there is some responsibility from the atheist social movement about the flying spaghetti monster.
And there actually is a silver lining in that front.
There's actually a significant silver lining. Friend of the show and one of my favorite bloggers, Emma Meta, the Friendly Atheist, actually raised money, saying, you know what? It doesn't matter if, the conspiracy theories aside, this is something about our social movement. We need to do something about this. And he actually raised money for it.
And within 24 hours, I know they raised well over $2,000. Was it like $2,500?
It came to $2,649.40 in 24 hours. And thank you, Hemat Mehta. And he said actually that any of that money that was raised in that 24 hours that wasn't needed for any of the cleanup efforts would be donated to the humanist charitable organization Foundation Beyond Belief.
Yeah.
And the nature, the response that he got from the pastors was, well, actually, we did have volunteers clean it up, and it wasn't that bad, and it didn't actually cost that much, and so your funds aren't needed. But both pastors John and Jason from the two respective churches did go on record expressing their gratitude and appreciation for the thoughts and for the efforts.
Yeah, yeah.
And this is something that I really, because clearly, Hemat Mehta is not the one, he is not the one who tagged this church.
Of course not. But
we do face the, I guess you could say, social consequences for it, that we take the brunt of it. And this is something that happens a lot, is, there are a lot of billboards up that if you want to get your message out, don't do it by spraying on someone else's property, get your own billboard.
Yeah. And
you can raise money for it. This is something that there has been a movement of. That's what the Atheist Visibility Movement is. However, I've noticed that there tends to be largely silence, and I may be wrong on this, when an atheist billboard is tagged.
I don't really think that matters, though. Is what it comes down to for atheism is, are we going to stand by what we mean when we say being an atheist or being a humanist means taking responsibility for your community and for what people do? And this is clearly a case of that. Is somebody decided to go spray painting churches with flying spaghetti monster stuff, and that is definitely a part of the Atheist Visibility Movement. And we, as the Atheist Visibility Movement, are we going to take responsibility for this stuff or not? And in this case, we did. We look pretty good.
I guess what I'm saying is that there's a lot of what I call the Randall Terry defense, that no, I wouldn't shoot a doctor, but I have no problem with someone else that does. We get a lot of that kind of response. A really good example, and this is Michelle Malkin, who seems to get mentioned a lot on our show.
Yeah.
After there was an atheist billboard tagged, I don't remember what state it was in.
I think it was in North Carolina.
Was it North Carolina?
I believe so.
It was actually tagged, and she was actually praising that person on her blog, saying that they were heroes, and the fact that they were anonymous only made them more heroic.
Yeah, but if that's what they want to do, if that's how they want to play it, that's fine. I'm not interested in their ridiculous theology and the broken morality that comes from it. I'm more interested about my own morality and what people who speak for me have to say.
I think so, too. I think that when it gets down to it, we have to look at the public figures that we disdain, whether it's fundamentalist preachers or bigots and things like that, and say, what is it that they're doing that I don't like?
Yeah.
And now I'm going to not be that thing.
And I think, likewise, though, when we do see a place for unity, we want to point that out and say, hey, you know what? Vandalism is bad. Whether you're an atheist, whether you're a believer, whether you're a humanist, whether you're a Pastafarian, whether you're undecided. And I think that we can, most people that have a mature enough attitude to be able to live in a pluralistic society and not feel threatened by other people's beliefs that are contrary to your own, we can all say, hey, let's work against vandalism.
The double happy ending to this also is that as of this morning at 2 a.m., Bend police actually arrested a number of teenagers, all of whom, well, teenagers, but they were all 18, and they were arrested and then released for this act of vandalism. So
one interesting thing, though, is that the news article from the Bulletin, the Bend Bulletin, didn't mention anything about the flying spaghetti monster. All it said was the nature of the graffiti that these three teenagers had committed at the skate park. It led the officers to believe that the suspects were responsible for the recent church taggings.
Yeah.
So very interesting, very delicately stated that it was just in the Bend news coverage. It was just that it was graffiti.
Well done. And I'd like to end on a high note. I'd like to be the Martin Luther of Pastafarianism. I'd like to nail my 99 Theses to the door and say that, you know what, Pastafarianism is not true. Because one of the major correlations they make in Pastafarianism is that piracy, it decreased as global warming increases. That piracy fights global warming. It's on their page. It's part of the Flying Spaghetti Monster movement. And you know what? Somalia has something to say about that.
That's indeed true.
Yeah. So I will be a heretic to the Flying Spaghetti Monster movement.
And the fun thing with it, too, Pastafarianism, that whole thing is it's supposed to be a joke.
Yeah.
It's intentionally silly.
Clearly.
And tagging it misses the point of it just being fun and silly.
Yeah. That makes it a weapon, and we don't need any more ideological weapons, fake or otherwise.
Yeah, there are too many silly beliefs already that are being used as weapons in the world.
Sure.
We don't need more.
Yeah.
And if you have
just
something
ask Lyndon LaRouche.
And if you have something to say about any of this, Pastafarianism, church tagging, atheists raising money for helping churches clean up some atheist graffiti, then give us a call at 253-584-1480. This is Ask an Atheist.
We'll be right back.
The Humanists of Washington is the oldest humanist organization in the state and offers a community of freethinkers who educate the public and celebrate life. Come celebrate life with us. Humanists support intellectual freedom and critical thinking and hold that human beings are autonomous centers of moral development. You can become a member of the Humanists of Washington at humanistofwashington.org. You'll get our quarterly publication, The Secular Humanist Press. Check out meetup.com, where you can be part of our monthly Seattle dinner and our Heathens Do It Better breakfast. humanistofwashington.org.
Tacoma Telematics wants to help you connect with your clients. We can give you a top-notch web presence. Tacoma Telematics can take your website to the next level and make it an essential part of your business marketing, but that's not all. Want VoIP? We've got it, bringing large corporation phone systems capability at mom-and-pop prices. We build intuitive interfaces to help you manage your resources quickly and efficiently. Take advantage of our holistic approach to make your business communications succeed effortlessly. At Tacoma Telematics, we're committed to personal and professional integrity, open communication, and long-term relationships. See us at TacomaTelematics.com.
You can advertise on Ask an Atheist on the radio, on our website, and in our podcast. People just like you who have the same interests are listening right now, just like you are, and thousands will download this podcast and listen to it later. If you have a product, service, or idea to sell, people here in the Pacific Northwest and people around the world, thousands will hear your message. Let us help you sell your product, service, or idea. Contact us at advertising@askanatheist.tv. That's advertising at askanatheist.tv.
This is Ask an Atheist, 253-584-1480, and we have another news story. Why don't you take it away, Becky?
All right, this one is entitled American Values Network Ad Targeted at Liberal Christians, which criticizes Republican affection for Ayn Rand. It goes like this. An interfaith group composed primarily of liberal political activists and mainline Christian clergy is attacking Republican devotees of Ayn Rand for allegedly undermining Christianity. Christians must choose Ayn Rand or Jesus. A new campaign by the American Values Network targets those who have praised Rand's brand of libertarianism. The network is staffed by Democratic Party strategists and includes as broad members former Democratic elected officials and a past Democratic Party National Committee chair, as well as a United Methodist ethicist, Phil Wogman, and he was a former pastor to President Bill Clinton.
Yeah, this ad highlights something that I've noticed a lot, and people want to ask about how atheists are, I wouldn't say the word necessarily persecuted, we're not being loaded onto cattle carts or anything, but there's a lot of bigotry against us.
Clearly.
And what we're seeing here is Christians, liberal Christians, not fundamentalists, not Pat Robertson, not the 700 Club, basically using us like a political third rail.
Sure.
Using atheists as if simple association with us. And if you're going to criticize Ayn Rand, and let's be honest, there is a lot to criticize, her atheism is pretty far down on the list of things to really go after her for.
Sure, especially if you're the Democratic Party.
Yeah.
There's a lot that Ayn Rand has to say that goes right against the political party of the Democratic platform, and there's also, if you have a religious base within your party, as the GOP does, there's a lot that there's a lot that you can talk about without having to use, shall we say, the A-bomb.
The A-bomb, and that's essentially the word atheist.
Yeah.
That a lot of times in their desire to distance themselves from attacks by religious right politicians, more liberal politicians will often, instead of defending us as part of their base, because a lot of atheists tend to lean more socially liberal, instead of defending us, they'll simply toss us under the bus and wrap themselves in Christianity and say, hey, we're just like the rest of you. We're not like those people at all. And this happened in a North Carolina Senate race back in 2008, I believe.
And it happens in Kansas pretty much every year when you get to attack ad season. Somebody gets accused of being more religious than the other, or more atheist than the other. Is that it is a constant stream of just sort of atheists have nothing to add to the political spectrum that we get in the diatribe of America.
But the basic idea that somehow we're political poison, that you don't even want to be seen with us, you don't want to be seen taking money from us, you don't want to be associated with our word at all. It reminds me a little bit of people attacking President Obama as a Muslim, but there seems to be a smarter reaction to that, saying, hey, I'm not factually a Muslim, but I'm not going to toss those people under the bus at the same time, necessarily.
There's a social thing here. I mean, everybody, when you have sort of tribal politics, and all politics in the end is tribal politics, there's us group and them group, and there's always, politics in America have always needed some safe group. It used to be other races, then in some corners it's gay people.
Now some safe group to criticize.
Some safe group to criticize, yeah. Some
like communists before.
Communists thrown, yeah.
That you just have to say, hey, so-and-so was seen at a meeting with this scary person, therefore they must be anti-American, anti-patriotic, anti-American values.
Are we scary people?
Well, I don't think so.
I don't think so either.
And that now it's safe to throw atheists under the bus. Now we are the third rail. And the only way to change that is through visibility. And that's what the atheist visibility movement is for.
So if you're not familiar with who Ayn Rand was, she basically, I guess you could say if the Star Trek, oh yes, I'm going there. The Star Trek mirror universe where everyone is evil and everything's kind of the same but opposite.
Right.
Where Spock has a goatee. She would basically be the Karl Marx of that universe.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
so
like
instead of somebody saying that you have this sort of moral obligation to the public good and that money, instead of everything being sort of communal like it is under communism, it would be that everything is individual, that you have no moral obligations to anyone, and that she actually even has a book called The Virtues of Selfishness.
Yeah.
And it seems like this would be the way that a more economically liberal person would attack her, rather than going after the atheist hang of it.
And including many atheists would attack her on that ground as well, specifically atheists that are humanists, because humanism, one of the tenets of humanism is a communal responsibility towards each other and improving the human condition, where Ayn Rand would have nothing to say about that, and in fact would say probably that it's misguided.
She does have something to say about that, and that's what the virtue of selfishness is about how selfishness improves the human condition. I mean, it is a part of her philosophy. So
there's a clear difference between, I guess you could say, mainstream libertarianism and objectivism, which is Ayn Rand's philosophy,
right?
Which is that a libertarian doesn't believe that government funds should be used to help the public good, whether through, protection programs, things like Social Security, Medicare, stuff like that. They're against that, but they tell people to give to charity privately. An objectivist goes a step further and says that you shouldn't help the weak.
Yeah, well, clearly Ayn Rand has a lot to say, and there's a lot that the Democratic Party could pick out to sort of highlight to show why Ayn Rand might be bad for the people they're trying to reach. But what do they reach for? They go the easy route and say, oh, she's a scary atheist.
Now, is this really because the Democratic Party might be trying to poach people that would ordinarily vote Republican, and many people that vote Republican will align themselves with sort of the new Republicans that are spouting, Randian philosophies, but then try and poach some of them who would be Republican voting or Republican leaning based on their religious convictions?
At some point, I have to stop caring about their motivations and why they're doing something. The fact of the matter is that we we are the third rails, that they are using us as an easy target to get these voters. I don't care why.
They're treating us like we're political lepers.
Exactly.
And that it's easier to say, oh, you're that person, you're this class of person, and that class of person is inherently bad. I mean, the fact is they end their ad with saying the choice is simple, Ayn Rand or Jesus Christ. We must choose one or forsake the other. No, we don't. I can say none of the above. I don't want to put myself entirely in the hands of one person or another as some kind of moral, spiritual, or ethical leader.
And if the population of the world is 7 billion now, there are 6 billion other people who say none of the above as well without having to be atheists. I mean, this is specifically, this is really sort of the encroachment of Christian dominionism in a way. It's bringing Jesus to politics.
And this is coming through liberals, and I think that this really points to something we've done an episode on before, which is Christian privilege, where they're so used to having 95% of the discussion fall their way that they really don't see any negative consequences to basically throwing the other 10% under the bus. And I'm offended by that.
Well, if you'd like to talk to us about this, you can give us a call at Ask an Atheist, 253-584-1480.
Yeah, and again, tossing us under the bus, remember, atheists are very strong potential political allies.
Yeah.
And you can either act as if treating us like garbage means that we're going to back you in an election anyways. Don't necessarily count on that.
Yeah.
We don't like being treated basically like lepers. We don't want to be treated that way.
Basically, if you want more people in your process, in your political process, keep an open mind and embrace us as a group. And speaking of open-mindedness, we do have a topic today.
Yeah, that's something we're going to talk about, and this is something that we get thrown our way a lot, is that we don't believe in a lot of the popular myths and ideologies that sprinkle our, I guess you could say, the collective culture.
Sure.
I think that's a fair way of putting it. So we get accused, because of our rejection of supernatural claims of different gods and different deities, that we get called closed-minded. Mm-hmm. And I want to say that that's not true. I want to talk a bit about open-mindedness today. What does it exactly mean to be open-minded? Well, open-minded doesn't necessarily mean that you just accept every idea that comes into your head and say that everything is equally true, even when two of the ideas you accept actually contradict one another. What it in fact means is that you're willing to hear it. You're willing to actually look at a question, even a question that goes against your, I guess you could say, your instinct, that you have this little, that rubs against the hairs of your current ideology or worldview.
Causes you to bristle a bit.
It's like when you rub a cat the other way and they kind of jump.
Sure.
It's a lot like that you have to be willing to hear it out. It doesn't mean that you have to respect it necessarily. It doesn't mean that you have to treat it as if it's true by default. So we're going to talk a bit about that. What are the extremes of belief and non-belief? One of them is gullibility, that you just accept anything that comes your way, whether it's because, well, everything's true until proven false, which isn't actually false, or things like paranoia, where you make connections between things that aren't exactly there, that you see, like, oh, that must be my neighbor is spying on me for the CIA or something. And on the other hand, you can't be a knee-jerk naysayer as well. You can't just be, which eventually leads to something called solipsism, where you think only your mind is the only real mind in the universe, and everything else is a simulation, that you don't believe anything. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to say that basically isn't true. I think it comes down to having a metric for determining fact from fiction that is practical and open-minded.
Oh, I think it might be worthwhile to talk about what, because, I mean, everybody's like, you should keep an open mind. This is something, especially in the Puget Sound, that we hear a lot, is you should be open to any idea. Any idea has worth. Any idea has a truth value to it.
Well, and Sam, when you and I lived in Arizona, we would take the occasional trip up to Sedona. Many people in Sedona say that there's a vortex there, and there's healing energy up there.
Vortex.
And should we be open to that? Should we be open-minded in accepting that?
Right.
And absorbing the psychic energies of the spiritual vortex?
Well, at the very base, I'll give you one reason, which I think is reason enough that you shouldn't just accept every idea that comes your way, is that when you accept every idea that comes your way, you become a target. You become a victim, somebody who wants to make a buck selling their snake oil or their particularly virulent theology. You're going to buy into that, and next you're wearing strange clothes and eating strange, poisoned food somewhere.
Yeah, you're living in bunk beds waiting for the UFO chasing the comet to come get you, or you're drinking poisoned Kool-Aid.
Now, there are surely people that are open and gullible to certain ideas that don't end up drinking poison Kool-Aid.
But if you blindly accept every idea that comes your way, you're a target for that sort of
And the same thing goes with even not just religious claims also, but any sort of claim whatsoever. Like there's a company that, I don't know if you guys have ever heard of dowsing rods before. This is the basic principle that a piece of rope or a forked stick can help you find water or gold or any number of things. Well, there is a company that has been selling this device, which is largely just a hunk of plastic with a Radio Shack antenna. They've been selling this to Iraqi police.
Yeah.
With the idea that this device, again, just a hunk of plastic with a Radio Shack antenna on a hinge, can find car bombs. Can you see the problem in this?
And they're doing studies that saying they're finding car bombs. They're finding car bombs.
If you check enough cars, you will find a car bomb.
And I imagine the incidence of car bombs in Iraq is something above the incidence of car bombs in, say, Tacoma, Washington.
That's true, but I mean...
Eventually you're going to find a false negative, and you're going to blow up.
On the other hand, the presence of this plastic device that reminds them to look for car bombs might have a psychological effect of making the police force more aware of the idea that there are car bombs. Therefore, they're going to be more cautious about car bombs than they would without the dowsing rod. Is when you do studies like this, you have to do double-blind tests. There's a lot of variables in here that come into play that maybe they are detecting more car bombs just because they're more aware because they have a plastic stick with them.
And here's the worst part. You know how much these plastic sticks cost?
How much?
About $900 a pop.
Oh man, I am in the wrong business.
See, that's the beauty. That's the same thing with a product like Head-On.
Yeah.
Where Head-On's even better because it doesn't even make any claims. If you've never seen an ad for Head-On, then you're probably living in a cave. That's essentially where you rub a hunk of chapstick on your forehead.
Yeah.
It's, I think, primarily carnauba wax, right?
Yeah, it's a homeopathic product, which is another silly concept that we're going to get into in a later show. But basically, they're selling you a piece of wax, not making any claims, and then people are projecting their own claims on them, like, oh,
Right.
it cured my headache, wow, it got rid of cancer, now I can see through time, whatever.
I didn't know Head-On was actually homeopathic until recently. I just thought it was, roll-on aspirin or something.
I think that's what they want you to believe. They imply that it's for headaches, but they don't tell you it's for headache. They just tell you to apply directly to the forehead.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and again, this really comes down, if we want to get to the core of what our metric is for determining fact from fantasy, it's got to come down to evidence.
Yeah.
Evidence all the way. That we think that I believe at least, that it is inevitably dangerous to untether your beliefs from a string of evidence. And that inevitably a bad idea will get in if you don't have a strong enough, I wouldn't say force field, I won't say a brick wall, I feel like a screen door. A screen door will keep out dead leaves and bugs and stuff, but it'll still let air in.
I like to say a tool set. I mean, a good craftsman tests their work. So
Now, Mike, I have a question for you. You said guard your beliefs against that. What about your actions? I mean, could you come to a place where you don't necessarily have evidence because the double-blind studies are maybe in process or haven't been funded by the NIH, but you have a feeling that you want to avoid a certain chemical in your diet or a certain practice, or you want to act in a certain way, in spite of there being, in spite of the evidence sort of still not being conclusive in there? Would you say that that's valuable? Or can a skeptic or an atheist honestly do that?
I think that to some degree it is, and there's a certain line where it crosses into paranoia, that the human brain is really good at seeing connections between certain things, between eating a certain plant and getting sick, or going to a certain place and feeling a certain way. Maybe there's a chemical in the air.
I think my favorite story about eating a certain plant is the tomatoes. When the Europeans came to the New World and found tomato plants, they were eating them in vessels that actually the tomato plants leached one of the heavy metals out of the vessels, and tomatoes were thought to be poisonous for 400 years.
So yeah, you have to really see what the connection is. That sometimes when you see a connection that isn't necessarily there, again, the human brain is a pattern-seeking device. It's what it's built to do. It can solve a problem, and it can see the connections between actions and consequences. but it can also sometimes see things that aren't necessarily there.
Right.
And that's where something like paranoia comes in, where you're convinced that aliens are trying to read your brain or that the government's all out to get you. And
otherwise, our brother and sister shows when we were on Scan.
Yeah, and often what you'll see with a conspiracy theorist, and this is something that Glenn Beck does a lot, where you're running from chalkboard to chalkboard, connecting these different things by often really tenuous connections, whether it's a similarity in a word or a color. You really have to have a chain of evidence that is much more conclusive and independently verifiable than that. I mean, if you don't have that chain of evidence, by what standard can you reject somebody else's crazy belief? I mean, I'm sure that most Christians out there are not going to buy into the conspiracy theories of David Icke. David Icke, if you don't know, is this British guy who believes that the world is secretly controlled by shape-shifting lizard men. By what standard do you think that's silly, but that, the talking snake in a 6,000-year-old world isn't? I mean, by what standard, aside from because I really believe this or because this has been around a lot longer than that? The same thing with, how do you know that a light in the sky is an alien rather than maybe just a helicopter or a planet or something?
Right. So bring it home for us. When does open-mindedness become gullibility? What is the test for that?
Well, I think you have to have a reasonable amount of evidence. In the end, nobody's going to pretend that we have this 100% belief in anything. And this is, again, we're atheists, right? We don't believe that a God exists. But we don't pretend to absolutely know that a God exists. So we're agnostic atheists. And I think on some level, we're agnostic about everything.
Sure.
But there's also a reasonable level of evidence you can have where you can make that last assumption. Like, for instance, the lights in the sky. I think you have to, in the end, go off of a reasonable amount of evidence. You don't fall into, say, the Scooby-Doo trap. Like every episode of Scooby-Doo, you noticed they find a guy in a rubber mask, and the rubber mask guy chases him around. They automatically assume he's a real monster, and in the end, they find out he's not. I think that after you do that enough, it's a safe bet that the next monster that jumps at you is probably just a rubber mask guy.
And one of the things that I do is I am a little bit trusting, although I am agnostic about all kinds of hypotheses. I am a little bit trusting of the collective human knowledge that is gathered through collective experience, repeatable things. I don't have to personally observe the Scooby-Doo mask being pulled off, or I don't have to personally observe this cancer drug actually working over and over and over again. I can take it on some amount of trust.
Reasonable assumption.
Sure.
Yes.
And for me, the difference between open-mindedness and testability is that open-mindedness and gullibility is that gullibility is when you hear an idea and you just accept the idea as gospel immediately. And open-mindedness is that you're willing to accept an idea for testing. Is that really what it comes down to is knowledge is tested ideas. You have to actually go with the idea, try the idea in an environment, make sure it works, and then it becomes knowledge. And that's, in a nutshell, with a couple of things added, you get the scientific method. And so at the end of the day, the scientific method really is open-minded. Oh, man.
Very well put, Sam.
All right. This is Ask an Atheist, 253-584-1480. We'll be back in a couple minutes.
End of the world is not. Millions will disappear in the rapture, and those left behind will feel the wrath of God.
So who better to help those people feeling the wrath than an atheist? We don't believe in God, so we're pretty sure we won't get raptured out of here.
You can help by donating to Rapture Relief.
We'll use the money to help those afflicted during Armageddon.
And if for some reason this all turns out to be just another failed prophecy, your money won't be wasted.
We'll give it to Camp Quest, which teaches children critical thinking and science so they won't be duped by religious fables in the first place.
Learn more at rapture-relief.org.
A satirical benefit for Camp Quest, brought to you by Seattle Atheists.
Join us after today's show at the Office Bar and Grill in downtown Tacoma. Offering a wide selection of tap and bottled beer, a full bar of your favorite liquor, and a taste bud tantalizing menu, come on down and shoot the breeze with the Ask an Atheist crew. Who can argue with your motives? After all, you're at the office. The Office Bar and Grill is at 813 Pacific Avenue in Tacoma.
If you enjoy the programming we create here on Ask an Atheist, please make a contribution with us. Your sponsorship helps keep our show on the air and improve the quality of our broadcasts. Donors get access to exclusive Ask an Atheist content. Don't make us beg. Please go to askanatheist.tv and contribute today.
This is Ask an Atheist, 253-584-1480, and we are talking about open-mindedness versus gullibility.
And Sam, there's something you talked about before, which was testability, and I think that's a big key of this, is that a lot of the claims that religious people make actively evolve being testable, and that's something we call non-falsifiable. And by that we mean there's a claim that is such that it can't be tested, it can't be proven wrong, so it sort of avoids having to go through the same rigorous process that anything that's proven does. I mean, let's imagine if I believe the moon is made out of cheese, I can test that.
Yeah.
Somebody can go to the moon and bring back a chunk of it, and indeed they have, and I can find out that it is, of course, not cheese. Also, people have a tendency to believe that the popularity of a belief somehow makes it the default position. And this is really where God comes in.
I think that's why so many people are inclined to believe the talking snake and the 6,000-year-old Earth, as opposed to the dowsing rods.
And it is one of the many bases of Christian privilege.
Yeah, that simply because 90% of people accept something and preach something, it becomes a lot easier to throw it into a conversation and not look silly.
Right.
But it doesn't mean that it's a smaller claim than something like that. Like, say, for instance, God versus, say, Superman. Superman actually is falsifiable. You have limits to what this dude can do, and you can test it, and clearly this guy is not Superman if he can't lift 100 pounds over his head.
Right.
But with God becomes more and more intangible the more you try to challenge this stuff. And again, belief is not the default. The burden of proof for any claim always lies with the person making it, not the skeptic. Popularity doesn't change that. What is the default position then? I'd say passive non-belief. Not necessarily saying that I absolutely don't believe this no matter what, but I mean saying, like a person who's never heard of a claim of God.
Right.
They don't have that belief. So yeah, I'd say they're probably an atheist.
This is the thing, is that once upon a time, skepticism just meant you didn't believe the claims. But now a skeptic and a debunker in sort of the worldwide conversation have become synonymous, and that's not really true. Once upon a time, skepticism really was that passive non-belief you're talking about.
Yeah, and I think it's something that I believe Robert Ingersoll said when he described himself as an agnostic. Yes, it means I don't know, but it also means you don't know.
Yeah.
And that we shouldn't pretend to believe things that we can't use that chain of evidence to prove. And again, that's what it really comes down to, is that's what faith is. Yeah. So, again, why does it feel like sometimes we're dismissing things out of hand without looking at it? Often because we have given this thing some thought before, and that religious people and people who make supernatural claims tend to repeat the same arguments over and over again, and we start to know the song when we hear the first chord.
Or we have developed a rejection for analogous situations or analogous hypotheses. If we investigated the dowsing rods made of plastic, and we looked at it and we said this is really based on spurious, ideas, then a dowsing rod based on rope is really going to probably follow the same pattern.
Yeah.
And simply saying you don't know the answer to something doesn't make all potential answers equally viable.
Right.
Like if I hear a sound outside my window at night, I hear a crack on the roof or something, and I'm like, oh, I don't know what that is. It isn't likely that it's probably going to be an alien abductor or a ninja.
Sure.
Or, chances are it's probably just a bird, or it's the wind, or it's the house settling.
Yeah. And this is one of those, discussions that we could go on about, because the thing is, an open-mindedness versus gullibility versus closed-mindedness and the scientific method and how atheism plays into this is something we get attacked on a lot, and it is worth addressing. So,
and again, if you want to throw something at us, it really comes down to, has even one instance of this been proven to have a supernatural source?
Right.
And until it does, I feel pretty safe taking supernaturalism off the table as a serious option until one instance is proven. Again, every mystery that we've ever gotten the answer to has turned out to be not magic.
Right.
So prove that, and then we'll treat supernatural on the table.
So if you think we're being closed-minded about something, if you want to bring something to us to see if we're really open-minded about whether we can test it or not, give us a call at
253-584-1480. This is Ask an Atheist. And we've got some emails and some really good ones. We'll start out with this one. This is from Anne from Seattle, and this is a direct response to a question I had about Fort Bragg. And she spent her childhood in Fort Bragg during the 90s. And she talked about the situation in the news story last week with the Vacation Bible School to the Fort Bragg Public Schools, and she was just as surprised as everybody. She was actually very surprised about it. I do not recall the mention of going to a Bible camp or even discussing religion in schools on base. These schools are both public government-funded schools, and the Army does set some standards in the education programs. So I think it is inappropriate for the school to provide a field trip to a Bible camp. Well,
with
clearly.
you there.
Yeah, clearly. On post, they should be setting a standard for public schools across the nation, and the schools on post were considered better than the ones in the surrounding area off post. Now Fort Bragg is in North Carolina and is considered to be a part of the Bible Belt, so there's definitely a Christian majority. And, you know, there's a lot of things that could go into this that I've been hearing about and talking about with my friends, is that maybe there was a change in the staff at Fort Bragg or something about, and it went and it's now run by very Christian people, and they're dominionists, and maybe they're getting stuff into it. Or...
It could also be reflective of sort of the rise in evangelical Christianity around the country and the rise in the visibility of evangelical Christianity.
Yeah, I think we should mention what dominionism is, and if you're not familiar with it, it goes beyond somebody simply just being a fundamentalist Christian activist, and takes a step towards saying that we live in an outright Christian nation that should be ruled by biblical principles. And sadly, there's a lot of people who've gotten into leadership positions in our military, and there is a majoritarian arrogance that comes from being part of a majority. And again, that same idea that popularity makes something the default position. They think that they can make something vaguely Christian, and that somehow counts as neutral.
Plus, there's a lot of revisionist history involved. That all of the founding fathers were very evangelical Christians and stuff like that, and that is just not true in their own writings. Some of them were Christian, some of them were vaguely Christian, many of them were deists, a couple of them were actually atheists. Like some people were saying, you know, with a evangelical Christian Thomas Paine. No.
Clearly they haven't read some of his books, like On Reason.
Clearly not.
Which was an outright attack on organized religion. He was not a fan of that. And even when he was awaiting the death penalty at one point, he was not giving that stuff up.
Yeah, and she goes on to write, I love the show, pretty new to it, and very excited to listen and become a member of the Seattle Atheist community. Thanks for all the hard work you guys put out into it. I just want to say welcome to the community, Anne.
Thanks, Anne.
Yeah, thank you very much. And we have another email. This is Michael from the internet. And this is a cultural perspective on atheism versus theism. I am a university student in London, Ontario, and I'm also an atheist. However, lately I began taking a class in cultural anthropology. A major aspect of sociocultural theory is the idea of cultural relativism, that any culture must be understood within its own context and not evaluated by the standards of one's own. That being said, almost all cultures, with few exceptions, are equally successful lifeways, and that individuals within their respective cultures tend to thrive and reproduce so long as negative outside influences do not interfere. He goes on to say that it follows that we've no business criticizing belief in gods any more than we have business criticizing aspects of any given non-Western culture, for to do so is to evaluate another culture's set of beliefs by our standards, i.e. atheists tend to value reason, and therefore we aim at acquiring true beliefs and avoiding false ones. A great many religious folk and religious cultures do not. I am not suggesting that truth is relative. I am not a proponent of the idea that what is true for you might not be true for me. Now, Becky, you had a lot to say on this topic.
I did. First of all, the sociocultural theory about cultural relativism really came as a response to some degree to a lot of the bigoted practices of anthropological study that had been going on in the 1800s and early 1900s as well, where you would have the educated European society, university professors going into the less evolved cultures of the world and judging their cultural practices in response to or in light of their own.
Right.
And so, it's sort of as a response to that, it's well well grounded to say, hey, you know what, we need to evaluate and look at cultures and study cultures from a descriptive perspective, as opposed to proscriptively judging what happens. So there's an element of that, and when we see cultural relativism in that light, it's a little bit easier to swallow and say, you know what, this is really as a response to making sure that we, as observers and as researchers, don't don't have bigoted ideas and practices.
There's a part of this is I think it's important to talk about atheism in that even we have different religions and desperate ideas in the idea in America. We're all part of this American culture, and if atheists are going to be a part of this culture, we have to be able to be a part of a dialogue and say why we're atheists and question things. And then ultimately, culture is not the arbiter of truth.
Absolutely.
Culture is maybe a filter through which you view the universe.
Culture is a way of practicing your life.
But it's not the truth, and we have to be able to, if maybe once upon a time we did not need science to advance a culture. That's not true now that we've got 7 billion people and we need agricultural practices that did not exist even 200 years ago. We need to understand how the universe works. We need truth. We need to be able to test things outside of the scope of culture.
There needs to be a foundation of facts by which we can come up with. Of course, we'll disagree on how to interpret certain facts, but the facts themselves have to at least be common. And I think that the idea that atheists should leave well enough alone, the fact that we don't try to pass laws forcing atheism on anyone, the fact that we're not killing people for their atheism or jailing them for their atheism, I think that is leaving well enough alone.
I would argue that the cultural sort of insularity is not well enough. The fact is that you can't have in the United States, in our world in general, a culturally insular community where negative outside influences, as Michael says, don't interfere. And I would take issue with the fact that any outside influences are inherently negative.
Yeah.
I mean, we live in a pluralistic society.
And this is something, and I even take that a step further and say that now that the uncontacted peoples of the world now are number in the hundreds rather than the thousands or hundreds of thousands, that we essentially have a monoculture. We don't like to think of it that way. We don't like to talk about it that way because it underscores or undercuts our individuality. Apparently, I don't think that's true, but I do think there is a monoculture, and if we're all going to talk to each other, judgment is going to occur. Somebody eventually, well, we're going to have to make a decision about something, and only one idea is going to get to win.
I think in the end, when I look at this, culture is something that's so... It's a bit like species.
Yeah. That
only when two cultures are really, really far away from each other can we point out to a hard line between them. And that I think of it as sort of a Venn diagram.
Yeah.
The things overlap each other. Are we part of the same culture as, I don't know, somebody like Richard Dawkins who lives in the UK? We're part of like the West culture. Are we part of the same culture as somebody who lives in the United States? Or somebody that lives in the same region, in the same state?
Yeah.
But then there are people you could say even in our own state or area. Like, I don't have the same culture as the people from Mars Hill Church.
And there's overlapping cultures and an intermix of things. Is we really, I think we really do need to stop looking at cultures as distinct units and start looking at them as inherited, in an object-oriented sense. There's sort of inherited data and inherited status and inherited practices. And
with variations within that monoculture.
Yeah.
I mean, there's always going to be observable differences, but we can't, I just don't think that it's viable to say we can't leave well enough alone, because we can't be left alone, because we are inherently in contact with one another on a daily basis through
and when you have these cultures that you pass laws at a national, local, state level,
yeah,
we have a stake in how that discussion comes out. And it doesn't mean that, oh, well, that's just part of their culture, so yes, we should ban gay people from being able to hold hands.
Right.
No, we have a stake in that sort of stuff, and it means that there's going to be a conflict of ideas and there's going to be some level of compromise.
And that means not only can we challenge, we must challenge. Now, we've got one more email, and I think this is one Mike really liked, and this is Sean from the planet Nimbu.
Oh, Nimbu. Yeah, this is kind of an odd one. Here's an argument for intelligent design I've come across and have no satisfying response. You start with the idea that reality exists and can be observed. You can see billions of galaxies with billions of stars and billions of planets. With nearly an infinite number of planets, it is statistically impossible that humans are the only intelligent life that has ever existed.
I think that's statistically unlikely. I'm not sure about Sean's statistically impossible.
There's not really a phrase statistically impossible. I mean, statistics doesn't, zero.
It deals in probabilities.
Unless you're dealing with a law of identity or something, then...
Well, yeah, even then.
It's impossible for me to be both tall and not tall at the same time.
Change the context, though.
Yeah. So basically, the idea that that humans create computers and love to play video games like Sims and World of Warcraft. In a century or less, we could create a living planet or computer. So basically, the idea that it's more likely for us to be a computer program than it is. It's a weird version of solipsism, really.
Yeah. It's the brain in a jar thing.
The Matrix.
It's the Matrix. It's a bunch of stories that came before it. It's the idea that once we have the ability to simulate whole worlds with people and experiences and the thing, and you can simulate this multiple times, because if you can do it once, you can do it a bunch of times. Eventually, it's going to be more likely that if you are an object if you are a person in the universe, that you are simulated rather than real. So the likelihood is far greater that we are all simulated people in a computer versus actually existing in a real universe. And my answer to that is...
So what?
Yeah, okay.
Well, I think that Sean from the planet Nimbu concludes his email saying, yeah, hey, the belief that reality doesn't really exist is not very useful.
Not very useful.
And I think that we all agree. Also, I mean, Sean titled his email, Proof for Intelligent Design. I think this is really a hypothesis for intelligent design. There really isn't any evidence here. It's just a really cool, neat idea.
It's a thought experiment.
Yeah, it's a very interesting thought experiment, and as someone who's into that whole artificial intelligence, computer programming type stuff, it's a conversation I've had a lot of times, and it's solipsistically cool and it's an interesting idea, but ultimately,
you don't have any positive evidence for it.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what it comes down to, is that yes, I could be a brain in a jar, and that everything that I experience and have done is all just a program that's being played through a computer.
Yeah.
But unless I have positive evidence for that, I'm just going to assume that my 5 senses are likely to be accurate.
So, Sean, I hope that is your satisfying response that now you can give for this argument for intelligent design that you have come across.
It'd be a cool idea. I mean, if I were going to live in a simulated world, I wish they'd give me some cooler powers.
Yeah. I mean, seriously, if this is like Second Life, can't I change it so that I can have a castle and can fly?
Sure.
It just seems kind of like a ripoff that you create basically a Grand Theft Auto type game, and all I ever do is go to work and work on a TV show. Not that working on a TV show isn't great.
Radio show.
Not that I don't love this, but if I have an unlimited special effects budget, I'm going to be a superhero.
I repeatedly and singly ask for one thing over and over and over again, and that is a spaceship. If this is a simulation, why can't I have a spaceship? Somebody give me a spaceship.
If you'd like to give Sam a spaceship, you can always email us at askanatheist.tv.
And so really quick, before we wrap up, we have a wedding update in that haven't done anything. People have been asking, and recently on Facebook, how are you guys doing? And my response was, no, we are terrible at getting married.
Well, I've obtained at least 2 family heirloom dresses that I will try and make something out of that you may be privy to.
And that's what we got for today. So thank you, Mike Gillis.
Hey.
Thank you, Rebecca Friedman. My name is Sam Mulvey, and our call screener was Nick Kennedy, and Chris Coleman did our music. You can always give us a voicemail at 206-420-0997, or you can email us at www.askanatheist.tv, and we will see you guys at the office in about half an hour.